everyone. Welcome to the ANU Indonesia Project Global Seminar. My name is Arianto Patunru, and I would like to start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to elders past and present. We are grateful for the support from the Australian National University and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Today, we will discuss the August issue of the Survey of Recent Development that is forthcoming in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies. To those who don't know the journals, BIES is the premier journal on Indonesian economic development hosted here at the ANU. The journal publishes 3 issues every year, and each issue always starts with the survey of recent development. The authors of the next survey are Dr. Monica Wiharja from ICS and National University of Singapore, Professor Muhammad Iksan, Universitas Indonesia, and Dr. Vivi Alatas from Asa Creativita, a consulting and ed tech company in Jakarta. We are grateful for their availability to share their highlights of their paper with us. It is titled, Times Are Changing, Can Indonesia Stay the Course? As usual, we will have question and answer session after the talks. But if you want, you can write your question anytime on the Q&A box, not on the chat box. We'll attend to them after the presentations or whenever I see fit. You can also ask verbally later on. Finally, please also kindly respond to the little polling on your screen. We need it to improve our series. Thank you very much. And without further ado, let me invite Monica to start the presentation. Over to you, Mon.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, distinguished audience and moderator and panelists. I see some very familiar names. Good morning, good afternoon. Now, please allow me to share my slide presentation. Oh, sorry.
Okay, it's worked now.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So today I'm going to present the August edition of the Survey of Recent Developments, which will be published in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies. And this paper is co-authored by Professor Muhammad Iksan and Dr. Vivi Alatas. So I have the pleasure to present and do the easy task of presenting this paper. And Professor Iksan and Dr. Vivi Alatas will answer the more difficult questions later on. So in my presentation, first I will explain why we think times are changing. Then I will discuss the most recent macroeconomic development and the new internal and external dynamics that could set a new direction for Indonesia. I will then discuss our strategic recommendations and conclude. So we argue that times are changing and we cannot rule out a future crisis in the near term. But we think that Indonesia is not yet prepared for this possibility. There are both internal and external dynamics that create many uncertainties. New internal dynamics is mainly created by the change in presidency. 10 months into his presidency, President Prabowo Subianto continues to face a challenging domestic landscape, faltering growth and unmet reform agendas set by previous governments, particularly those of President Joko Widodo. But he also introduces his own style of leadership and management of economic policies perceived to be populist, project-driven, and fiscally expansionary. Indonesia's potential and actual real growth in GDP has slowed. Persistent low tax revenues and a surge in government and Bank Indonesia's debt have raised broad concerns which have triggered significant financial market instability. Employment conditions have worsened, households are under strain as deflationary pressures coincide with rising non-performing loans and decline average savings. And this is compounded by external shocks. The world economy had been destabilized by geopolitical tensions and deglobalization, prolonged COVID scarring, demographic pressures, and climate as well as pandemic risk. So now let's look at the most recent macroeconomic developments up to Q1 2025. Recent data shows subdued economic growth outlook. Growth in domestic demand in Q1 2025 slowed markedly to 4.1% year-on-year, down by more than a percentage point from the same period in 2024. Private consumption growth remained robust at 4.9%, but government consumption contracted owing to the ongoing fiscal austerity. Investment growth decelerated sharply to the slowest level since the pandemic. Food-related household consumption remained stable. However, growth in health-related consumption slowed to 3.6%, while leisure spending rose to 6.4%, boosted by the Eid-ul-Fitr holiday. While leisure spending rose to 6.4%, boosted by the Eid-ul-Fitr holiday, indirect indicators suggest the quality is weakening. We can see a drop in hotel occupancy and electricity use in the hospitality sector alongside rising residential electricity consumption, implies a shift from premium leisure activities to lower cost alternatives. Net exports grew robustly at 19.6% in Q1 2025, driven by relatively stable export growth but weaker import growth, consistent with slowing investment. Looking at the economic growth, on the production side, growth was sustained largely by agriculture and food production expansion. Without this, GDP growth in Q1 2025 would have fallen closer to 4.2% compared to 5.1% in the first quarter of 2024. So this trend suggests that maintaining 5% growth will be difficult without timely and effective policy interventions. On the fiscal side, there has been a shortfall in tax collection and the effectiveness of fiscal spending is in question. On the revenue side, tax collection in the first 4 months of 2025 was 10.8% lower than in the same period of 2024. Non-tax revenue in the first 4 months of 2025 declined even more sharply, falling by more than 24% year-on-year. Fiscal risk on the revenue side remains elevated as Indonesia's revenue structure remains heavily reliant on commodity cycles. On the expenditure side, as early as May 2025, several budget components were on hold, resulting in lower spending during the first 4 months of 2025. Budget reallocations designed to support new policy priorities and efficiency measures in response to revenue shortfalls have also contributed to reduced government spending. There are other factors that also increase fiscal risk, and these include the change in governance and oversight of state-owned enterprises from the Ministry of Finance to Ministry of State-owned Enterprises. State-owned enterprises dividends are now managed by Danantara, Indonesia's new holding entity for state-owned enterprises, which also acts as sovereign wealth fund. On the monetary side, we are entering a low inflation, high interest rate environment. Inflation is projected to remain stable at approximately 2.3%, falling within Bank Indonesia's target range of 1.5 to 3.5%. A key factor is the strong performance of the agriculture sector in Q1 2025. Subdued domestic demand and monetary policy interventions contributed to the low inflation in Q1 2025. This low inflation environment theoretically provides Bank Indonesia with an opportunity to ease monetary policy further. However, continued depreciation of the rupiah has significantly constrained its monetary policy space. The central bank now faces a classic policy dilemma of low inflation environment, whether to prioritize exchange rate and financial stability by maintaining higher interest rate, or support economic growth through further rate reductions despite the risk of capital outflows. Furthermore, there's mounting concerns over Bank Indonesia's independence and poor stock market performance. In terms of central bank's independence, there are concerns regarding re-engagement in quasi-fiscal activities such as the housing financing support. The revised 2023 Financial Sector Safety Net Law risks reintroducing practices when political objectives also played a role in banks' practices. As you can see from the graph on the right-hand side, the Indonesia Stock Exchange Composite Index has performed relatively poorly compared to many other global and regional stock markets since President Prabowo won the election in February 2024. And this was triggered by market sentiment about the worsening macroeconomic outlook and fiscal risk, a stock and bond rating downgrade by two multinational investment banks, news of the government launch of Danantara, and rumors that Finance Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati was to resign. And in response to the flagging stock market, the Financial Services Authority introduced a new policy allowing publicly listed companies to buy back shares without requiring shareholder approval, potentially undermining good corporate governance. On the external sectors, we are seeing deepening of resource-oriented foreign direct investment and exports. Total foreign direct investment realizations in manufacturing almost doubled in the period of 2020-2024 compared to 2015-2019, as you can see from the graph on the left-hand side, largely due to higher foreign direct investment realization in base metals following the passing of the Omnibus Law on Job Creation in 2020 and the government's export ban on unprocessed minerals. Although an increase in manufacturing FDI should be applauded, it has become concentrated in the capital-intensive base metal industry. And although FDI is crucial if Indonesia is to achieve its goal of becoming a high-income country by 2045, attracting FDI in capital-intensive, resource-oriented industries alone is not sufficient. Although the policy to increase value added by banning exports of unprocessed minerals is well-intentioned, it acts as a tax on other sectors, especially labor-intensive industries, as it redirects government resources to attracting FDI to resource-oriented sectors. Labor-intensive sectors were severely hit during the COVID-19 pandemic and are still struggling, as you can see from the graph on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side. This is in contrast to the performance of priority sectors such as base metal, electrical equipment, machinery and equipment, and automotive, as you can see from the graph in the middle. Indonesia's ability to date to attract significant FDI beyond resource-oriented industries has repercussions. Between 2008 and 2023, Indonesia's export growth was largely driven by intensive margins, meaning more exports of the same products to the same markets. So there is plenty of room to increase export through product and market diversification. The shift towards resource-oriented manufacturing industries has also largely resulted in lower employment elasticity to growth in the manufacturing sector in Indonesia. Employment elasticity to growth in the manufacturing sector, as you can see from the graph below, has been slashed to about 1/3, falling to 0.3 in 2019-2024 from 1 in 2014-2019. So every 1% growth in manufacturing GDP created about 45,000 jobs in the period of 2019-2024 compared to around 155,000 jobs in the period of 2014-2019. On the balance of payment side, there have been reversals of current account surplus as commodity boom ends, and also volatile financial investment. Indonesia's current account is highly exposed to the boom and bust of commodity cycles, as you can see from the graph above. with the boom that began in 2021 ending in 2023. Indonesia's current account returned to negative territory between the second quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2025. It had been in positive territory between the third quarter of 2020 and the first quarter of 2023, except in a couple of quarters triggered by government's downstreaming policy and high commodity prices. In the first quarter of 2025, the financial account recorded a deficit after a surplus in quarter 3 and quarter 4 2024, due in part to significant outflows of other investment and weak net inflows of portfolio investment. Notably, net direct investment flows have been declining, as you can see from the graph on the right-hand side, at a time when Indonesia needs stable long-term investment such as direct investment. Unlike portfolio investment, direct investment is less prone to sudden outflows and is important since Indonesia's export revenues are highly exposed to commodity boom and bust cycles. In the first quarter of 2025, the balance of payments turned negative after 2 quarters of being positive, although international reserves continue to increase. On the exchange rate and the stock market side, the Indonesia's rupiahs and stock market have been weakening since President Prabowo's election compared to other global or regional countries, as you can see from the graph on the right-hand side for rupiah exchange rate. From February 2024 to April 2025, the rupiah performed the worst of all ASEAN 6 countries, including Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And since January 2025, there has been a change from positive to negative correlation between the rupiah and the US dollar index, which measures the performance of the US dollar against selected currency, including the euro, yen, sterling, and Canadian dollar. The rupiah fall was mostly due to domestic factors, but also international issues. From the domestic areas, Indonesia Stock Exchange market trading halt, growing concerns over the country's growth outlook and fiscal health, and weak government public communication contributed to the rupiah's fall. From the international side, US Federal Reserve decision to keep its policy rate high for longer and the US reciprocal tariff contributed to this rupiah's fall. Now, what are the new external and internal dynamics that could set a new direction for Indonesia? The first external factor is the China factor, often called the second China shock. China's export competitiveness in manufactured products makes it challenging for Indonesia to compete in its own domestic market and international markets. There has also been a cloud hanging over countries in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, namely export redirection from the US to Southeast Asia as a result of the US tariff on China. But it is notable that Indonesia imports mostly capital and intermediate goods from China. On average, 74.2% of ASEAN imports from China consisted of capital and intermediate goods. And defying the long-term trend, Indonesia had trade surplus with China in 2023, as you can see from the graph on the right-hand side. Although I think in 2024 that has declined. Being Indonesia's largest export destinations by far, a weakening Chinese economy will negatively affect Indonesia's exports of goods and services to China. The second external factor is the US. Usually, during a period of crisis or near crisis, people will invest their money more in dollar and US Treasury bonds. But this time is different. There's a clear sign of a loss in market trust and confidence in the US dollar and US Treasury bonds as safe havens in difficult times. During the financial market whiplash triggered by President Trump's reciprocal tariffs, the dollar dropped while the US Treasury bond yields rose rather than fell, showing that people are trashing US dollar and US Treasury bonds. The biggest risk associated with declining trust in the US dollar and US Treasury bond is an increase in the US sovereign debt risk. The recent US funding cuts to aid programs under the USAID, changes in immigration policies, ad hoc deportations of students, including Indonesian students, and hold to new foreign student visas issuance risk undermining the knowledge spillovers from which Indonesia has benefited, including by sending students to study in the United States. The third external factor is the undermining of the rules-based international order. The recent major setbacks in global cooperation threaten to unravel what remains of global cooperation. These setbacks include the withdrawal by the United States from the Paris Agreement on climate change for the second time, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations Human Rights Council. There's also significant downsizing of USAID, the weakening of the WTO, and the undermining of other global institutions. This has direct and indirect effects on developing countries, including Indonesia, which have benefited from rules-based international order. In fact, the current US-Indonesia tariff deal negotiations that Indonesia has to go through is a good reflection of how important rules-based international economic order is. Besides these new external dynamics, there are also internal dynamics. Indonesia's market economic resilience in recent decades have been anchored on four foundational pillars: fiscal discipline, central bank independence, a dynamic private sector, and a vibrant middle class. These pillars have been collectively supported Indonesia through a variety of domestic and global shocks, including the global financial crisis in 2007-2008. However, each of these structural supports are now under pressure, raising questions about the sustainability of Indonesia's growth model. First, fiscal discipline is under pressure. A combination of rising public debt and a lack of transparency in budget reallocation under President Prabowo raises doubt about Indonesia's fiscal discipline. And the actual fiscal burden is expanding due to additional financing needs. And although government officials tout ongoing budget efficiency as a success, there's growing concern that essential public services are being cut. We are not cutting fat, we are cutting muscles. In particular, questions remain about the governance, cost effectiveness, and transparency of the free nutritious meals program and Danantara, which account for the bulk of reallocated funds. It is expected that Indonesia may again reallocate funds in the 2005 fiscal year, further complicating the fiscal landscape. Central bank independence is being eroded. Bank Indonesia, long regarded as the pillar of macroeconomic stability, is facing increasing scrutiny over its perceived loss of independence. Recent developments suggest Bank Indonesia has reverted to quasi-fiscal activities outside the usual mandate of a central bank. One such example is its re-engagement in housing finance initiatives, ostensibly justified under the revised financial sector safety net law, which allows it to intervene in the secondary market. But given Bank Indonesia's expanded role, it revives historical concerns about the pre-1998 policy practices in which political interference undermined monetary policy and threatened its institutional credibility. Third, private sector dynamics is being muted. Approximately 90% of Indonesia's GDP is generated by private firms, making the private sector a critical engine of growth. However, private sector dynamism depends not only on entrepreneurial energy, but also on enabling environment. Unfortunately, the Indonesian private sector remains hampered by deep-rooted structural constraints, including a persistent missing middle in both manufacturing and services, and lack of competitive dynamism for larger firms. More recently, private sector vitality has been further challenged by a resurgence of state-led approaches, including the creation of Danantara, the evidence of state-owned enterprises operate in competitive and contestable sectors, and the establishment of Koperasi Merah Putih in rural area. Fourth, the weakening of middle-class contribution. The authors argue that the contribution of middle class in Indonesia has shrunk, although this is being debated in public. The size of the middle class, a crucial driver of Indonesia's economic growth, shrank to 17% of the population in 2024 from 23% in 2019. Its contribution to household consumption fell to 38% from 47% between 2017 and 2024. Although inflation has dropped, stagnating real wages since 2017 account for this fall in the size of the middle class. Moreover, with the manufacturing sector's job contribution declining and the loss of middle class jobs across all sectors from 2018 to 2024, the creation of good quality middle class jobs is likewise being undermined. Furthermore, average work hours have dropped, underemployment have grown, and high mismatch between university graduates and labor market requirements undermine labor productivity. Economic and social consequences of these new external and internal dynamics are already visible. They are no longer theoretical and is playing into Indonesia's structural and macroeconomic vulnerabilities. Fiscal pressures have worsened due to persistent low tax revenues and growing government and Bank Indonesia's debt. With more layoff and stagnant wages experienced recently, the labor market has worsened. Despite record low inflation, consumption remains concentrated on basic necessities. And with the output gap persisting, consumption is likely to rebound strongly in the near term, further dampening growth prospects. These developments reflect a feedback loop. Fiscal tightening and macroeconomic fragility are weakening market confidence and real economic outcomes, which further strains public finances and monetary policy. In short, the key messages with these recent developments are firstly, that a future crisis cannot be ruled out. This time is different, both externally and internally, and Indonesia is not yet prepared. Secondly, growth pillars are eroding, a trend that began under the previous administration but has recently accelerated. So, what are our recommendations? First, restore policy credibility. And this can be done by rebuilding macroeconomic credibility that is critical for restoring investor confidence and ensuring policy effectiveness. This involves 3 steps. First, reforming fiscal discipline and adherence to the 3% deficit ceiling, safeguarding Bank Indonesia's independence to maintain its inflation targeting mandate and monetary credibility, and safeguard the credible and consistent public communication. Second, reform state-led development. The role of state in the Indonesian economy is shifting towards a more proactive guiding function. Initiatives like Danantara must be carefully governed to avoid becoming too big to fail. Greater transparency and accountability as well as performance-based evaluation are essential to ensure that these initiatives support inclusive and sustainable growth. Third, rebuild the middle class with a new social contract. Indonesia needs a new social contract based on mutual interest. The middle class in Indonesia increasingly relies on private services, leading to resistance against higher income taxes for public services they do not use. This creates a cycle where low quality services and limited economic mobility reduce willingness to pay tax, which in turn limits tax revenue and budget for public services. The government could rebuild the middle class with an initial contract by focusing on 3 main commitments: improving public services, providing social protection and offering a safety net, and creating decent jobs to ensure economic mobility. Fourth, improve policy decision-making. Indonesia needs to transition from reactive to strategic policymaking. There's a need for a systematic effort to evaluate the impact and implementations of policies. Innovative programs and big budget allocation and reallocation requires continuous feedback to understand what works and what doesn't. Fourth, prepare for a potential crisis. In an increasingly uncertain global environment characterized by policy shocks such as trade tensions, Indonesia must continue to develop and preserve its policy buffers. These include not only fiscal and monetary tools, but also robust social protection mechanisms and resilient institutional frameworks. A forward-looking and precautionary approach grounded in flexibility and responsiveness is essential for Indonesia to sustain stability and inclusive development in the face of global uncertainty. To conclude, new external and internal dynamics present Indonesia with both new challenges and opportunities. While many external factors are beyond Indonesia's control, its policy choices will determine whether it can bend the course towards its advantage. President Prabowo has big ideas for Indonesia, from the free nutritious meal programs to the Nantara, but he needs stronger technocrats to conceptualize his ideas and develop them for implementation. Given the new external and internal dynamics, a greater macroeconomic buffer is needed. Exploring untested territories, such as introducing new too-big-to-fail programs such as the Nantara and the Free Nutritious Meals program, needs more careful, thorough, and prudent planning than before. Trust in institutions remains key to microeconomic reforms, while better public communication will prevent the government from wasting its political capital. A faltering middle class risks political instability. The government could turn Indonesia's middle class from a problem to a voice, from a bane to a boon. And while it is better to underpromise and overdeliver, recent reform efforts are perceived to achieve the opposite, and this undermines trust and confidence in government reforms. For the long haul, more prudent, transparent, evidence-based, and inclusive development is essential for sustainable and resilient growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for the very comprehensive presentation. So let's now open the floor, the room for question and answers. If you have question, please just raise your virtual hand or write your question and I'll read them. I don't see any hand. There are some questions already written. So let me go to. There's a question from Heath McMichael. Is the resurgence of state-led approaches like Danantara or Koperasi Merah Putih, will they lead to an elite rent-seeking?
Thank you. Maybe Professor Iksan can answer this
Okay.
difficult question.
Okay. We already mentioned that the risk of transforming the Danantara or Koperasi Merah Putih is, of course, there, because it's not new for us, but happening in the past. So far, we don't see yet the realization, but the risk still there. That's what we can answer. On the Danantara case, because it's quite structured relatively well in the market discipline, I think the risk could be managed. But for the Koperasi Merah Putih is more unstructured. That if it consists of a big government money, it could has a potential problems. It's not only for the fiscal, but also I really worry about the what's called the destruction of the supply chains at the in the rural area, in the roads. Yeah, that's the problems. If, for example, like if you want to change the current distribution channel from the private sector to the Koperasi Merah Putih, it could have a destruction on the supply chain, and then could affect the distribution of the essential goods if, for example, like if you want to move LPG distribution from the all warungs to Koperasi Merah Putih, uh, it could have problems on the distribution, but also on the uh, employment issue because on the as you know on trade and distribution sector absorb a lot of jobs there. There will be some also job destruction on that sector. Monica or Vivi want to add?
No, I think that is enough.
Okay, let's move on to
You
next
have
questions. Oh, but Fifi, do you want to?
no.
Okay, all right. So on the next questions, I'm going to combine questions from Rose McLeod, Mira, and Andre Suryanta because they're similar. The first one is about the definition. So Ross McLeod asked, what are the income distribution percentiles that define your so-called middle class? And then Mira asked, you have recommended a new social contract to rebuild middle class. Please explain what's new about this. And Andre also follows up saying that thank you for the very enlightening presentation. Can you expand on the new social contract based on mutual interests? What kind of social contracts? So over to you, Monica.
Maybe I will let Fifi to
Oh,
answer
okay.
this question
Fifi.
first. Yeah, on the income
Thank you.
distribution
Thank you.
percentile of middle class and new social contracts. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, of course, in terms of middle class, there are quite a lot of way to compute middle class. Some using some kind of like the PPP, either for example, Harras and Fengler use 12 to 120, and some other people use other benchmark. For example, McKinsey in 2012 used 3,600 PPP and etc. What we do in here, we are actually following what the World Bank aspiring middle class and also economic mobility and the rise of the Latin America middle class way in computing middle class. And what we did is trying to look in terms of using the risk of falling into poverty or vulnerability. The middle class are those people who have minimal risk of falling into poverty or vulnerability, less than 10% probability of falling into poverty or vulnerability. Defining middle class threshold based on this economic security offers several advantages. This approach ensures that the middle class is characterized by a level of income or expenditure that provides safety from falling into poverty or vulnerability. Unlike arbitrary threshold, this definition is conceptually grounded in the notion of economic security. Additionally, it is tailored to the Indonesian context. Where are the cutoff will depend on the panel data that we got from Susuna's panel data from Indonesia, making it more relevant than global benchmark. Of course, in terms of like the social contracts, there are several things that we need to take into account to ensure that Indonesia indeed will have a more improvement in terms of like these engines of middle class as the engines. Why the middle class is the engines? Because middle class pay more. Most of the 40% of the consumption comes from the middle class. Middle class invest in their children, and also middle class provide more opportunities for others through income generating activities. What we push in here, there are several things that needs to be done more. If we look in terms of like how to ensure that middle class, the social contracts. Currently, Indonesia have an array of social protection system, but most of those social protection systems is cater more for the poor and vulnerable. It doesn't mean that it has to be social assistance, but we need to have more social protection system that actually provide ability for those above the poverty lines to also address some of like the peculiarity in life, the shocks that can easily push them below to the lower class. The type of social contracts can vary, but what we need to look in terms of the pain point of the middle class. One of the most pain point of middle class is actually ability to get good jobs. Indonesia rely in a very informal way of connecting to good jobs through kinship, through network, through friends, but not really through more formal job search mechanism. One of the things that government can provide is actually more providing ability to provide ability to get good jobs. Of course, the social contracts can also base on fostering productive sectors such as modern manufacture, ICT, health, education, tourism, promote competition of enhancing reform, remove barriers to FDI. The problem in Indonesia, it's not jobless growth. It's actually the last year's 4.5 million jobs is being created, but most of those jobs are low productivity jobs. Addressing like all the constraint on the demand side is very much needed. The other things that we need to put more is there is almost less chances to improve upskilling and rescaling, reform and expand like TVET or other possibilities to get ability for upskilling and rescaling, incentive for company to provide more on the job trainings is very much needed. Another issues is also more in terms of like the ability for middle class to actually get more support, like better support from the current social protection systems to ensure like less crowding out. For example, issues on improving the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan, improving BPJS Kesehatan, another possibilities that Indonesia can do to get social contracts that provide more jobs, but also at the same time provide more social protections for middle class in lieu to their involvement through their tax paying. That's probably from my side, but Monica and Ichan might want to add.
There is one follow-up question from Ross about the computing the middle class, and then he asked about whether our calculation end up with what kind of in the decile term, percentile term within 40% or 90%, or what is the?
So middle class at the end is around 17%, and while the
70 or
upper is
17?
around
No,
17.
the
percentile, Mbak Vivi.
The percentile, it means the percentiles will be between 80 to 96.
Okay.
80 to 96. Because the upper class is just around 5%, 4%.
All right.
But that based on Susunas, right? Current Susunas.
That's based on Susunas, yeah. But even if we try to look in terms of like both Susunas or Sakernas, the way that we define middle class in Susunas is using consumption. Through Sakernas is trying to estimate what kind of earnings needed to fulfill the possibilities of having consumption like middle class. Both Susunas and Sakernas also shows that Indonesia is decreasing in terms of the creation of middle class jobs. Even next Sakernas is starting in 2019, 2018, and Susunas is starting on 2019.
Okay, thanks, Mbak Vivi and Mas Ichan. So let's move to the next topic. I see a question from Max Sambodo from Breen. I think this has some sub-questions, so bear with me. Between 2000 and 2010, Indonesia had a hollowing out phenomenon in terms of net job creation. Any comments on this? Second, how do you see the current industrial policy in addressing structural problems such as quality of job and unemployment among the youth? Third, any comment on the impact of tariff war on SMEs and labor-intensive sector? Maybe Monica?
Sure. I think between 2000 and 2010, as my co-author Wendy Cunningham and I mentioned in our World Bank's jobs report, Pathway to Middle Class Jobs in Indonesia, there's certainly hollowing out in terms of net job creation because of deindustrialization after the 1997-1998 crisis, which is followed by commodity boom in the early 2000s that ends around 2011, which is also compounded by China rising as the global factory of the world, right? So there's deindustrialization in the manufacturing sector with the manufacturing employment contribution and GDP contribution going down significantly post 1997-1998 crisis. And when how you see the current industrial policy in addressing structural problems such as quality of job, unemployment among the young, I think, as I mentioned in my presentation, that there are these external factors, right, on top of internal dynamics, but also external dynamics that are playing out currently. The China sector, China has become very competitive in producing almost all products, the rules-based multilateral trading system is being undermined, as well as there's this US factor as well, which in a way giving a lot of uncertainties in terms of trade and investment and business climate. So there's a need for rethinking of industrial policy going forward. I think that we need to think beyond export industrial-led growth development model. We need, of course, to improve our business and investment climate, including regulatory and legal certainties in the countries. So it goes beyond just industrial policies, but the whole government approach, and that also includes educational reform and talent reforms. In terms of addressing structural problems, quality of jobs and employment among the young, I think Fifi can add to this. But again, good quality job directly or indirectly relates to our industrial policies. I think already mentioned in my presentation, the focus on downstreaming policy has deepened this natural resource oriented industrialization in Indonesia, in which employment elasticity to manufacturing growth has declined. So we need to bear in mind, we need to keep in mind that not all investment create good jobs and or create many jobs, and the concentrations of foreign direct investment in resource-oriented extractive sectors could also impact the quantity and quality of jobs created in Indonesia, especially if that means, as I mentioned in my presentation, a tax to the labor-intensive industry. And any comments on the impact of tariff war on SMEs and labor-intensive sector? I think the government has tried very hard to make a deal in their negotiation with the US to lower the tariffs of Indonesian goods going to the US, which are mostly coming from the labor-intensive sectors, including textile, garment, footwear, and electronic equipments. So I think I think from the government side, they've done their best to protect the labor-intensive sector from the ongoing war on tariffs.
Thank you. Let's move on to
Maybe I'll add a little bit just to clarify.
Sure.
Actually, since indeed between up until 2010, you have the following net job creation. But after that, especially 2018 to 2024, we have plenty of job creation. It's actually around 18 million new jobs created between 2018 and 2024. Between 2023 and 2024, it's around 4.5 million. But the issues is about the quality of jobs. That's why what we see still idleness for youth. You have the high youth unemployment for especially for college graduates. So this is not just about job creation, it's about quality of jobs more than just job creation.
Can I add a bit?
Sure, Mas.
If you look at the current industrial policy, especially for the natural resources related industrial policy, we don't see any employment effect because most of them are capital capital and technological intensive, right? So I think on the job is very small impact. That's one additional add from me. But the second one on the impact of SME the tariff war. The tariff war and negotiation is the just necessary condition, but not sufficient. Again, like Monica said, that we have to do another sufficient condition by improving the quality of business and then the quality of education from the input side, because that's very important. If you look at our our job market, there are many mismatches. On one hand, a lot of people have difficulty to get the jobs, the decent job, like Fifi said, the quality jobs. But at the same time, the business sectors still complaining that they are very difficult to get enough talents from the market. So the mismatch is still there. I think even bigger now. That especially dealing with the what's all the the new generation, the Z generation, is very difficult to get them committed for the jobs. So for the company point of view, they are difficult. I just heard from the Indica group and then from the Paragon. Paragon, the what's called their the growing cosmetic company. They have a difficulty to get the right talents from their perspective. That's an issue. So the mismatch there. That's where the intervention needed from the government.
Thank you. Next question is from Justin Lee. When you talk about a potential crisis, what sort of crisis do you envision? So this is maybe on your strategic recommendation slide, Monica.
Okay, so I think the immediate potential crisis that I have in mind, Pak Ican can add to this, is again another stock market and rupiah fall or shocks, and this could be easily easily happen if investors again lower their confidence on the Indonesian economy, especially as a result of the heightened fiscal risk and Bank Indonesia's independence, on top of sort of like a worsening business and investment climate. And because of that, because of the stock market and rupiah decline, this could further in turn cause social and economic crisis if it lowers growth even further, and this could have an impact on employment and increase layoff. And social economic crisis can then turn into political crisis. So they're like multi-layer kind of like crisis that could potentially happen in the near future.
Thank you.
Yeah,
In-
but I think
Yes.
I don't think we will get crisis like 1997, 1998. It will not get that level. I think it would go similar like what we faced during the taper tantrum or the during 2008, 2009 for Indonesia, not for the global. For the Indonesia, our growth is down to 4%. So some kind like 3-4%, but that's not enough for absorb the new entrants. That's the issue. Once the other problems is, as Fifi mentioned, it will create what's called the low quality jobs instead of the decent jobs, middle class jobs. That become an issue for us, and then it will, if you look at the mobility, it will move to agriculture, either agriculture or the informal sector in trading or transportation. The ojek driver will, the applicants might be will increase significantly, will depress their income. That's the issue. And then if they are not satisfied with, especially for the new one, if they don't satisfy with their revenue, it could create some social problem. That's what I would expect as I would envision of the Indonesian crisis. It's a smaller growth, lower growth, and not like in 1997, 1998.
All right. Okay, next is from Natalia Subagio. The government is indeed thinking about improving social protection mechanisms, but the concerns is that it is not for ensuring economic stability, seemingly, but for political stability. Secondly, the perennial problems of legal uncertainty, corruption remain unsolved. What are your views on these?
So, this is a difficult question to answer. Fee?
I'm not the right person to talk about legal
I,
uncertainty,
I
corruption.
can start, and
Yeah.
maybe Paichan and Fifi can add. So in terms of social protection, yes, you're right. We've seen this. Just before the election, for example, increase social protection just before the election. What we need is more evidence-based fiscal incidence analysis. So look at the impacts of social protection rollouts, right? Who benefit from this, and the fiscal cost to this. So that's answering the first question. Second question, I completely agree. I think it's difficult to talk about Indonesia becoming an advanced economy, high income country by 2045 without talking about reforming the regulatory and legal environment in Indonesia.
Mbak Natalia, I think I agree with you, especially for the second one. if Indonesia want to move toward the advanced country, the legal foundation should be the one of the important ingredient for our inclusive growth for the future. If that's the issue, but this current practice, I think, still far from the minimum requirement. That's my view. Basically, as you said, that we agree on your statement.
Yeah. Maybe I add a little bit. I think that in terms of the social protection shouldn't be just based on looking at, oh, the current social protection system, which is PKH or Seraskin and extra, and just try to make it into bigger one. It should be more about addressing the pain factors of the youth, the pain factors of not only middle class, aspiring middle class. When we talk about middle class, this is I'm answering Ross' questions also in here. We are not talking about the 17%. We are talking about the 45% that does not have ability to naik kelas. That's like our main concerns about previously between 2010, between 2002 to 2016, there is a growing, quite a lot of like aspiring middle class that can climb up the ladders. No, the hope of climb up the ladders has become smaller. What we want to talk is not just about those 17%, but actually 17 plus 45 plus the 20% of the vulnerables that do not have a high probability of climb up the ladders in life. In terms of the social protection, I think there is a need to really think through, for example, jobs issue, youth idleness. What are the things that we need to do to ensure that those 1 million additional sarjana every year can actually get good jobs? It's not just through cash transfer, through more uh, ways of like including like active labor market interventions or probably learning from other countries such as the Hofenes program, which actually showed that its impact is that sustained impact, but it's not just only providing money or providing training, but life skill match with the some cash transfer plus internship activities plus some kind of like mindset nudging, combined and targeted programs. I think social protection is needed, but we do need to think through about what kind of social protection that actually will help this aspiring middle class to climb up the ladder and the social protection to ensure that the middle class will not go down to become aspiring middle class. That recent panel data in 2023 and 2024 indicated that actually 40% of the middle class in 2022 becoming aspiring middle class or vulnerable in the next year. Maybe that's from me.
Thank you. Next is Teuku Rifki. This is about Danantara. So does Danantara pose a risk of private investment crowd out and a drop in confidence by private sector? And what can be done that is politically feasible to minimize this risk? And he follow-ups with an explanation of this question. I can imagine that it might be confusing for investors considering the potential of conflict of interest that is embedded in Danantara. For instance, if the Minister of Investment engages in talks with foreign investors to collaborate with domestic private sector, it easily raises doubts whether he will serve the interests of domestic private sector players or Danantara, given his other capacity as CEO of Danantara. Any take?
Okay. On the risk of the private investment crowding, by definition, of course, there the risk of that. But the question is whether they have money to crowd out the private sector, because right now their source of income still coming from the dividend of the state-owned enterprise is 90 trillion a year, might be. Yeah, it's a 90 trillion how much in US dollar. It's still very small in terms of GDP, right? So I don't think uh, so far with that kind of source of funding would crowd out the private sector, especially for the formal one. I did calculate if you read my recent working paper at the LPM, I estimate what is the value added of the SOE. I think the scope is relatively small, despite of perception of the possibility of SOE become not zombie that like Dracula, eating all the. I don't think this is their capacity is still small. What I more worry about like I said before on the Koperasi Merah Putih because it's coming from the government money and banking credit the state on and then it will uh, crowd out the really informal, the small one at the rural area because it replaced a lot of job at that. That's what it's because not clear in the Danantara they have some kind like market discipline because they being constrained by the ability for them to attract money and then the money if you go to the market will see what is the prospect etc etc so there is a governance there. Yeah, that's what it, and then some of them actually uh, publicly listed, right? So I think there some kind like market discipline there. And then what I heard that they have because they in order to attract people to invest in to provide financing for Danantara from the outside, they have to uh, establish the framework. Nah, during the to attract the market sector, they have to provide some kind like proposal to the private sector to get the money. I think it will have some kind like market discipline on that issue. That of the engage and talk on question will serve our domestic interest. Of course, I think even without that position, there will be some kind of conflict interest between CEO dan Antara and because yeah, dan Antara owned by the government with on behalf of some of the private sector could have potential political obligation to them. That's why we address important to have a strong governance to guide the both the investment governance and the operating governance across the Danantara.
Thank you, Mas Ichan. We discussed already about the Trump tariff war in the context of SMEs. There are two follow-up questions here about that issue. First, from Teti Ginting, what is your view of the U.S.-Indonesia recent trade agreement? After weighing the pros and cons, it seems to me that the agreement will mean more import from US. So what will the impact be on the Indonesian poor? And the second one is from Gafar. TKDN, that's local content requirements, is one of Indonesia's industrial policies, with the hope that domestic companies will grow faster because of such protection. However, the current agreement between Indonesia and the US will cancel this policy. What's your opinion about this?
Monica, can I answer? The
Yes,
first one
right.
on the TKDN. TKDN actually one of the issue on our business, uh, what's called the blind business climate issue. It will not help to develop instead of creating incentive for domestic one. It actually hurdle become a impediment issue for the uh, foreign investment because the first one is to create another cost for because the local sources is limited, and the second one even they have difficulty to find the local partner to get the to fulfill the KDN. If you look at the case of Vietnam and Thailand, they actually abolished the TKDN uh, requirement, and then they end up with a higher local content. So we thought TKDN on the regulation, they end up with a higher uh, local content. Why? Because the TKDN governed by the bureaucrats. Why? While if you look at from the business perspective, they govern by profits, right? If they see any incentive to get the lower cost, they will go anyway, either domestically or from the foreign sources. That the issue of the TKDN. I don't think it will affect. The second one, if you look at the characteristic of uh, U.S. investor, except for like garment or the footwear, because they are the principal, right? Adidas and what is the Nike, and then what others. Uh, but basically, all Indonesian factories is dealing with the principle from US. If they see Indonesia would be uh, better, I think they will uh, make a contract with the procure more from Indonesia, which is more will give a more uh, benefit for Indonesian SME. That's one. The second one, if you look at the import, our agreement with the most of our agreement between US and Indonesia to import more from US. Basically, if you look at the composition, start from the energy. In the past, we buy our oil, LPG, and some from Middle East. Now we buy that from US. So basically, substitution. Uh, Substitution from Middle East to, and then for the wheat, in the past we buy from Australia or Argentina, and then now we will buy from US. Again, this is a substitution between uh, across the foreign suppliers. And then maybe a soybean. Soybean could have some impact on, but the Indonesian ability to increase the production of the soybean is also limited. I don't think any problem with the increase of import uh, in aggregate term.
Monica, do you have comment?
Yeah, I think I just want to highlight, some caveats in terms of the deal, right? There are certainly positive and negative feedbacks about the tariff, and in my view, both are right in the sense that we need to do this negotiation so we don't lose out to other countries, right? Who also like making negotiation with the US, and we also need to protect our labor-intensive industries, for the access to the US market. But let's remember, right, that nothing is a done deal with Trump, right? Anything can change. Indonesia claimed to have the lowest tariff in ASEAN outside Singapore. which has an FTA with the US. But then a few days ago, Philippines also got the same rate as Indonesia, right? 19%. And we don't want to be trapped in this like intra-ASEAN competition, right? By, continuously making concessions just to get lower tariff compared to our neighbors. And when we talk about like tariffs or relative tariffs, right? Is it correct to compare, let's say, like Indonesia's tariff vis-a-vis Vietnam? Our trade surplus with the US is much lower than Vietnam, right? Should we get even lower tariff than 19, which is only 1 percentage point difference from what Vietnam gets? So again, like I think the devil will be the details, and I think we need to continuously, review this deal and conduct more rigorous cost and benefit analysis.
Monica, if you read the what's called the announcement from USTR, well, from the USTR yesterday or 2
The
days
White
ago,
House.
the White House, yeah, there is still a room for negotiation, the lower tariff for the product that kind of like impossible to, what do they call it?
Yeah. So if the US doesn't have that product, Indonesia can ask for even zero tariff going to the US. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
And they also say that there are also possibilities for business deals, right? Commercial deals going forward.
Okay, let's move to another. There is an interesting question from Ibu Mutia Gani Rohman. Do you have any thought on how to capitalize on the emerging social entrepreneurs? I understand that some of them are mixed in the category of UMKM, that's micro and small medium enterprises, but this is a rather recent phenomena where these initiatives are coming from the younger generation who are digital savvy, and they, for one way or another, have the aspiration on the value of solidarity. So how do we capitalize on this emerging group?
Do you want to answer?
Yeah.
Maybe one thing, of course, like currently with the AI, everyone can actually create their own SaaS software as a services and etc. Social entrepreneurship emerging social entrepreneurship, we can expect that it's something that becomes like more easier. But I think that in terms of like capitalize, incentivize, one of the things that we need to provide is like more incentive for angel investors. Currently, the tax system for angel investor is like the capital gain can be quite huge, which is that could be based on the tariff of the personal income tax, which
Sorry,
could be
Mbak
like more
Fifi,
than
what is angel
30%.
investor?
Angel investor is like those who invest to this startup that providing money. So if we want to have more and more of the social entrepreneurship, you do need to have like more ability for them to attract funding, and the attracting funding through angel investor. But the angel investors is actually some things that like in some countries, India and also in Singapore, there is more incentive for
Tax incentive.
providing investment to this type of activities. In Indonesia, you do not have that kind of incentive for angel investors. So my worry is like even though AI, the stars are aligned in terms of like the technology and etc., but most of the people who can afford to do this will be more from the established, not really from the young that do social entrepreneurship because of like lack of ability to get funding. That's from my side, but probably Ichan and Monica have like some additional way how to capitalize.
So I think on that side again, we need to have some kind like to lower cost of transactions. The issue is by, for example, simplify the regulations and then providing good for example like internet broadband if you for the case of what's called the one who writing the programs what's called
Software developer.
program the computer program for example like
Developer?
yeah develop some kind like that it's you have to they need the stable broadband for that I think would help them a lot beside availability of capital like angel of investor. And then the last one on the legal protection, again, like Mbak Natalia said, that the legal protection is actually will benefit the the young entrepreneur because if they are able to develop the innovate something, they need to have a property right, strong property right protection.
I think I
Okay.
just add a little bit on this. This is based on my personal experience. So, for example, I'm sitting in Singapore right now, and I can actually I can help investment of startups in Indonesia, which allow me actually to sign some legal documents digitally. So I think technology plays a role because otherwise I have to go to Indonesia and sign on top of materai, right? But I can actually now invest in startup Indonesia because that digital documents, legal documents, allow me to actually make digital signature and interoperability of payment, financial transactions, between Indonesia and other countries, so that investment doesn't always have to come from Indonesians, right? It can come from Singaporeans or Americans or Japanese who are interested in investing in social entrepreneurship in Indonesia. So that's my two things.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, and that's from Mas Asep Suryahadi. The middle class is defined as those whose per capita consumption is between 3.5 to 17 times poverty line. The government has stated they will revise the poverty line calculation method. If the poverty line is increased significantly, the number of middle class will become very small. Should we develop a different way to define middle class? Maybe Mbak Vivi.
Okay, so it might be a little bit technical, but I will try to make it like less less jargon kind of. Actually, in terms of the computing middle class based on the vulnerability approach, it's not really how many numbers of poverty line. The poverty line are only serve as a deflator at those time. What we need to have is like so all of like the middle class computation is based on like the computation based on like the aspiring middle class from the World Bank, which is like launched in 2019, but it's actually those report using 2008 and 2010 Susunas panel data. We need panel data to compute probability of getting into upper class or getting into the next class and etc. So the way to compute that is actually based on those panel data, get a non-parametric estimations and try to compute one by one the threshold for vulnerable and then the threshold of for the aspiring middle class and then the threshold for the middle class based on this probability of not going down to the next to the lower level. And based on that, we got the cutoff. And the cutoff is rupiah. And the cutoff is rupiah because it's using like some non-parametric. But then to make sure, because not every year we have a panel data, to make it into the next year computation, we need deflator. The deflator that the World Bank use is actually poverty line. That's why the middle class is being put as the 3.5 to 17% times of the poverty line, but because of its using. Then, of course, 2008 and 2010 Susunas panel data is a long time ago. The probabilities of like the context behind it will be different is very high. Recently, with the 10P2K team, the policy teams under the Kemenko PM, we try to use the more recent data. The more recent data of Susunas with panel is 2022 and 2023. Based on those data, what we got is actually it becomes middle class is actually between 2.85 to 8.9 of the poverty line. But of course, there is another questions to what extent should we use poverty line as a deflator? Shouldn't we use, like for example, CPI as a deflator? Should we use non-parametric as a way of computing this probability? Shouldn't we use more parametric because people exit and enter classes depends on their not only just a non-parametric, there is some structural within that. That's another way of computing. I think that coming back to ASEP questions, it's not really straightforward right away that middle class will become decreasing because of like poverty line will increase, because poverty line does not really serve in terms of the computation of those middle class. But there are room for improving how to compute to the middle class or even the vulnerability threshold or the aspiring middle class. There is a need to have like more recent data. There is a need to have the panel data. There is a need to have like better like robustness checking in terms of the modeling.
Thank you, Mbak Fifi. Thank you so much for all the presenters, Monica, Mas Ichan, Mbak Fifi. I learned so much, and I hope so did the audience. And if you all would like to read the full paper, please stay tuned. It will be published very soon, open access. Please check our socials for information. And the next survey of recent development is being prepared now. It is written by Professor Mari Pangestu from Universitas Indonesia and Professor Shiro Armstrong from Australian National University. And it will be presented during the Indonesia Update Conference on 12th of September. That's less than 2 months from now. Thank you again. And let me hand this over back to my co-host, Lydia Napitupulu. Over to you, Lyd.
Thank you, all panel speakers, Acho, and also for attendees. So join us for a host of activities in the next coming 2 weeks, 3 weeks, as we Indonesia Project celebrate our 60th year. I've put the link to our program, full program in Canberra and Jakarta in the chat box, but I will also play a video so you can see that we have many, many activities in Canberra and Jakarta, and I hope to see some of you at some of our events. Thank you again. See you at our future events.
And I apologize to those who wrote questions, but I didn't have time to write to read them. Sorry about that, but we will forward your questions to the speakers. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.